Well, it's a very late summer evening, and this is the word for the week. All hat and no cattle. It's a long time ago now, my friend Richard Swain, Louisiana cattleman retired and retired missionary to the Balkans. Years ago we were drinking coffee at his favourite cafe in Mostar, and he introduced me to the expression all hat and no cattle. What does it mean? Well, it's a Southern American states expression. It means someone who talks big or dresses the part, cowboy hat, but has no real substance, no cattle to back it up. Very pleased to say my cattle are standing behind me here today. Lovely to see them out of a cool evening like this for a walk. That term, all hat, no cattle, is very similar to an empty suit. You know, that expression you might be more familiar with? Pejorative term for someone who looks the part, business-like, well-dressed, but has got very little going on between their ears, an empty appearance of capability. Now, those are pretty harsh criticisms, aren't they, of a person? But in our passage today, James goes way, way further than that, as we're going to see in a minute. James is writing to a bunch of mainly Jewish believers in Jesus who've been scattered across the known world, and he does that in a literary form they'd be familiar with. This is like wisdom literature in a letter, featuring practical Christianity and faith in public view. And within that format, James 2, 14 to 26 forms the climactic argument in this letter's first major section from chapter 1, verse 19 to 2:26. It brings together the themes of hearing versus doing, chapter 1, verses 22 to 25, religion as enacted mercy, chapter 1, 26 to 27, and partiality against God's way, God's law. And then we get to our particular passage for today. And that passage hangs on a very sharp hook. James poses the question, what good is a faith that only speaks but never acts? And as for James's roadmap through this passage, well, the passage comes as a dramatic high opera tour de force in 3 movements. Chapter 2, verses 14 to 17, there's this hypothetical case he throws up, an initial idea that he's trying to get across, faith without works is dead. And then chapter 2, verses 18 to 20, there's an imagined person he's having a discussion with, puts a counter-argument, testing the inseparability of faith and works. And then verses 21 to 26, he gives 2 examples, 2 people, Abraham and Rahab, supporting a body-spirit analogy, drawing its strength from the idea that a body that does nothing that it ought to do is a dead body. So this passage then addresses the relationship between faith and works, employing the Greek philosopher's technique, public speaking style, called a diatribe, putting rhetorical questions, illustrating the major point using 2 different but nevertheless prime examples, Abraham and Rahab. And he's punching all the way. So here comes James's grand opera then, in 3 movements, dramatic, forceful and emotive. Act 1 of our opera. Faith without works is dead, he says. Chapter 2, verses 14 to 17. Okay, imagine the scene. James, the brother of Jesus, writes to believers scattered across the ancient world. People trying to follow Jesus through some tough circumstances. And he asks a really uncomfortable question. Here it comes. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can that faith save them? Ooh, straight away, you feel the sting, don't you? James isn't wasting time with polite introductions here. He's cutting right to the heart of what he wants to say, the heart of what faith actually looks like. And there's an interrogation to unpack. It's as if James fixes his readers with a very beady eye and phrases his opening gambit like this. Can such faith save that person? Faith without works. The Greek's very specific. James isn't knocking faith in general. He's talking about a certain kind of idea of what faith is believed to be. The kind of faith that lives in theory, lives in the mouth, but never makes it to the hands. Faith that talks, but never acts. And once he's done that, James goes on to paint this picture we can all imagine. He says, imagine this. A brother or a sister turns up. No coat, no food. They're shivering, they're hungry. And someone looks at them and says, "Oh, bless you, go in peace, keep warm, eat well," and then shuts the door. Sounds pious. Might sound kind. But what good is that, says James? Words don't feed bellies. They don't warm the body. And James says that's exactly what faith without works is like. By itself, it's not for real. In fact, it's not breathing, it's not moving, it's not acting, it's dead. Did you hear that? Dead. Your faith is dead. Here's the big point, dead. Not weak, not struggling, not immature, just dead. A corpse. James, you're being very deliberate here. Just as a body, he says, without breath is a lifeless shell, so faith without action to back it is no faith at all. It's an empty confession. Now, we ourselves, we might not often send hungry neighbours away with just a pious slogan. But isn't there something uncomfortably close to that in our world today? Think of how easy it is to like a post about poverty online, saying what a terrible thing it is. Or to say, "Oh, I'm praying for you," when someone shares a need. But then never follow it through with anything concrete, any action, anything that happens to help. Think of the ways church can sound spiritual, but still close its doors to the very people that Jesus wants to welcome. See, James's point, it lands on us. Real faith shows up in how we clothe and feed and care for people, in how we deal with people, encourage, help. Faith that stays in the mouth, he says, isn't living faith. Living faith takes shape in action. Okay, James has set the stage. He's shown us the kind of faith that is no faith at all, faith that talks but doesn't cut any mustard. And next he's going to push us a little bit deeper into a kind of a debate. He's going to ask, can faith be separated from words like some kind of private belief? And he'll give us a very uncomfortable answer. So here comes Act 2 of our grand opera then, with faith and works in dialogue. He's taking it up a gear again, is James, introducing like a debate. He imagines someone answering back to a proposition. It's a classical style called diatribe. You argue with an imaginary opponent. James writes, "But someone will say, 'You have faith, I have works.'" Do you hear the divide there? You do the believing, I'll do the doing. We've got different gifts, we've got different emphases, we're different people. Doesn't that sound reasonable? Well, James is not having any of that. He throws down the challenge. You show me your faith without works, and I will show you my faith by my works. Now, that little word show is very important there. The Greek verb is dexonmoi. It means to expose to the eyes, really, to give evidence or proof of a thing, to make something visible. James is saying, okay, you might want to say faith is invisible, you can't hold it up to the light. No. The only way faith can be seen is by what it does. And then he drives the knife in deeper. You believe that God is one? He says, good. But even the demons believe that, and they shudder. Now that word there is standard word for faith. It's the word that James has used all along. But now he's narrowed it down to bare intellectual assent by referring in this context previously to such faith as this. That is the faith that is theoretical, but doesn't do anything. Where does this formulation of faith, you believe that God is one, come from? Because you see, James is writing to Jewish readers. They're the people receiving this letter. They're going to recognize that sort of format straight away, that sort of phrase, God is one. It comes from the most fundamental expression of covenant identity found in the Old Testament that James's Jewish Christian readers were still using daily at this time. It comes from what we call the Shema in Deuteronomy 6 verses 4 and 5. It says this, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." That's the formulation. That was the fundamental formation in Judaism. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And James is saying that if you concentrate simply on loving the Lord your God with all your heart, but do not love the things that same Lord loves with all your heart, loving and caring for the needy and so on, then that isn't a living faith in God at all. It's no better than the sort of faith you'll find in demons. See how he's working with who they are and putting it in terms they're going to be absolutely stunned by. If even demons have orthodox theology and all it does is make them tremble, then mere belief doesn't make you a friend of God. That's so powerful in a Jewish context. It's condemning the suits full of nothing at all. See how James uses the pronouns here. You and I, you and I. He puts them right up front in emphatic position. It's almost a face-off. You show me and I'll show you. The structure sharpens the contrast. He's being very forceful. And then in verse 20, he turns directly to the reader with a stinging address. O empty person, or anthrope kene. And that word kenos means hollow, void, without substance. There's nothing there. James is saying, if you think faith and works can be separated, you've emptied faith of its very life. That's uncomfortable, isn't it? See, we live in a culture where faith is often treated as something private, an opinion, something you hold in your head or maybe in your heart. You do you, I'll do me. And James says, no, that will not wash. Faith that never comes out in practice is empty. Think about it. He's saying more than that. He's saying faith that never does anything makes you an empty person. See, someone might say, I believe in generosity, but if their bank statements never show it, what is that belief worth? James is pressing us. Faith and works are not two separate categories, they're the same thing. They're two sides of one coin. Faith without action is an empty shell, and what used to live there is dead. That's what a shell's like, isn't it? So James has shown us the negative. He's talked about a faith that talks but doesn't act, a faith that even demons could claim. But now he turns to something positive. He's gone from faith in inverted commas to faith that is for real and acts. He points to real life examples. Abraham the patriarch, holy man of God, and Rahab the outsider, the prostitute. And he says, this is what living faith looks like. This is Act 3 of this grand opera. Verses 21 to 26 of chapter 2 of James. Let's introduce the examples. James brings in two very different characters, you see. Abraham, the father of the nation. Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute. You couldn't get more opposite in background. But they both demonstrate for us the same truth. That faith and works, if faith is genuine, are going to be inseparable. There's truth being talked here in the conversation that he's having. Abraham, first of all, James writes, was not Abraham, our father, justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? Now that word justified, it's the word for being put right with God. It's the genuine word for the genuine thing. Sometimes people try to argue here that Paul and James are at odds about faith saving you. That's nonsense. Paul's biggest exposition of how people are actually justified by faith is to be found in the epistle to the Romans. And that begins with Paul explaining that his purpose in life is, Romans 1:6, to call all the Gentiles, that's the non-Jewish people, to the obedience that comes from faith for his name's sake. And the bottom line is Paul and James are in total agreement that faith has to do something. Abraham's faith was proved real when he acted. He was put right with God by faith alone. But the faith that justifies never comes alone. And James puts that very beautifully in verse 22, talking about Abraham. He says, faith was working together with his works. It's important to note this. James is using the definite article in connection with the word faith in this passage. We'll come back to that. The Greek is hepistis. Hepistis sun erge tois ergos. The faith was working together with his works. There's this synergy between them. You can almost hear that word synergy in synergeo, can't you? Faith and works weren't rivals. They were partners working together, not to justify, but to demonstrate the reality of faith in the world. And James adds, and faith was made complete by his works, Abraham there. His faith was made complete by what he did because he believed. Faith reaches its culmination, its finishing line, when it's acted out. And then James quotes Genesis 15:6, just as Paul did in Romans about Abraham. Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. He says that scripture was fulfilled when Abraham then went on to offer his son Isaac, to trust God with his once longed for and now deeply beloved son. In other words, the faith Abraham showed in Genesis 15, which put him right with God, found its expression, its reality in the world, in Genesis chapter 22. Okay, that's enough of Abraham. Let's come to Rahab. James now lands on a totally different character with Rahab. Verse 25, chapter 2 of James, was not Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she welcomed the messengers and sent them out by another road? Let's ask the question. What was it that Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute, did right? Well, she recognized and acted on the recognition of God's reality and his power. Rahab had heard reports about the Lord's mighty acts, the Red Sea, Israel's victories, and so on. But unlike her neighbours, she believed those reports and concluded, the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below, Joshua 2:11. Her faith set her apart from the rest of Jericho, who also had heard and believed what had happened, but did not respond. Rahab acted on her faith. She sheltered the Israelite spies at great personal risk. She misdirected the king's soldiers, sending them away while protecting the spies. She negotiated safety for herself and her family, of course, showing foresight and courage, but what she'd done is she'd aligned herself with God's people, trusting him, as well as trusting them, to take care of that trust. And instead of siding with her own city's rulers, she sided with Israel by tying the scarlet cord in her window, signalling her trust in God's promise of deliverance. And she became an example of saving faith. And the New Testament lifts Rahab up as a model. Hebrews 11:31 praises her faith. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient because she'd given a friendly welcome to the spies. She put her trust in this God into action. Now James 2:25 highlights her works. Her faith was proved genuine in her actions. She's also in Matthew 1 verse 5 as part of Jesus' genealogy, an outsider, a woman and a prostitute, yet brought into God's redeeming story. Well, we better sum up on Rahab because that's going to get too interesting and too much fun. What Rahab did right was recognizing the truth about God and acting decisively on that recognition. She risked her life to trust a God she'd never met personally, and in doing so, she and her household were saved. The scandalous outsider, showing living faith by protecting God's people at risk to herself. Faith is taking flesh in her act of hospitality and her courage. Okay, well, James wraps up what he's been arguing for here with a devastating image. He goes on and he says, having drawn these dramatic and drastic and high opera type comparisons, he goes on and makes this stunning statement. For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so faith apart from works is dead. And that's the third time he's used that word nekra, dead. Doesn't say weak faith, doesn't say partial faith. He says dead. Faith without works is a corpse, just like a body without breath. Well, Abraham and Rahab together have made the point. Faith lives in concrete action. For Abraham, it was costly obedience, trusting God enough to lay down what was dearest to him, his son. And for Rahab, it was risky hospitality, but more, it was recognizing God for who he is and therefore siding with God and God's people against the godless, God-defying flow of her own culture and people. So what about us? Where is God calling you, calling me, to let faith come to completion in action? For some of us, it might mean costly obedience, trusting God with career, with family decisions, with money. For others, it may mean risky hospitality, welcoming the stranger, standing with those on the margins of society, even when it costs us social standing or personal comfort. Notice, Abraham is the patriarch, Rahab is the outsider. Faith is no respecter of our status. God is delighted by any faith that acts, whether from the highest or the lowest person, from the insider or the outsider, regardless. And that's got to be such good news for every single one of us, hasn't it? Okay. James has built this case. He's asked, what good is it to have a faith that doesn't work, or a so-called faith? It's not a genuine faith, it's a dead faith. What good is it to have that without action that demonstrates its reality? He's shown us the futility of a hollow, verbal-only faith. Hats without cattle, suits full of nothing. He's challenged the idea of separating faith and the action that should flow from it. And he's given us these living pictures of Abraham and Rahab as examples of his point. But his closing image is unforgettable. As the body apart from the spirit is dead, so faith apart from works is dead. That's our final verse, verse 26. Let's think about it. A body without breath may look intact, but it's lifeless. There's no evidence of life. Bears us asking the question, doesn't it? What evidence of spiritual life, of God's life, is visible in us? Do others see the breathing, moving, active reality of Christ at work in me, in you? Or is it like a body with no breath, a faith with no pulse? Well, if that's the case, it's time for a bit of CPR, isn't it? James has given us that searching question. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? He's pressed us to see that faith without action that follows it is dead. He's warned us against hollow words, against mere assent. He's painted pictures in Abraham and Rahab of faith alive in action. And he said, that's what you want. And now he leaves us with this great question. Is your faith even breathing? Is it alive? Now, for committed believers, that's a call to maturity. Faith reaches its goal when it acts. So what's to be our next step? Is it costly obedience or risky hospitality or an opportunity to let faith breathe into action? And maybe you're looking at that and you're thinking, well, I thought I believed in theory, but I'm certainly not there yet. Well, for people who truly seek him from that sort of position and from that sort of view of life, for the God-curious now listening in, the good news is that God isn't looking for perfect lives, but for living faith. See, take Abraham if you like. Abraham's faith wasn't flawless. Rahab's life wasn't perfectly respectable from that point on, but both trusted God enough to act on what they knew he'd want, even though it looked a bit risky. And God welcomed them in. And that same welcome is open to you and to me every day. So let's not settle for a faith that is neat but dead, tidy but breathless. Let's embrace a faith that is alive, embodied, costly, risky and real. Because as James says, faith apart from works is dead. But faith with works, faith that breathes, that trusts God to take the risks this involves, that's what flows out from having the very life of God in us as we trust him enough to follow him, to embody ourselves, the things that he cares about and that make his heart beat perhaps a touch more quickly when he sees those things active in us, the demonstration of our faith in him in a hostile and sometimes risky world. God bless you as you trust in him to act for him in the coming week.